All right. Welcome everyone. I'm Ross. I am one of the co-founders of Run for Something. As you come in, it would be really awesome if you could go to your chat. There's a little button at the bottom that says chat. Click on it, set your settings to all panelists and attendees, and please introduce yourself. We'll get started in just a minute as we wait for people to join. But if you're just joining now, again, go to the little chat feature, tell us who you are, set your settings to all panelists and attendees. Ben from Run for Something will get the party started by introducing himself, who is different than Ben from NextGen, who you'll be hearing from today. I'll sort of like I'll start by giving a little bit of an overview about Run for Something, what we do, why we're here, and then we'll just get this thing kicked off. So first of all, again, for folks who are still jumping on, I'm Ross Rocketto. I am one of the co-founders of Run for Something. Run for Something recruits and supports young, diverse, progressive folks who are running for state and local office. That means that we work in all 50 states. We love, we also love youth vote work. And we're doing this series here, called our Armchair series, where we talk to people who are practitioners, really high level in the electoral space, to give folks advice on running campaigns, in a world of global pandemics, systemic racism and police violence, recessions, global uprisings. So just like 2020. As we get started here, I'd also like to thank our sponsors who have allowed us to keep this series free for everyone. That includes Act Blue, AFSCME, Authentic Campaigns, Fireside Campaigns, Claire and Stephen Crouppen, Onward Together, Yelp, Precision Strategies, and our friends at Planned Parenthood. If you can hear folks in the background, that is my lovely wife, Jess Morales-Rocketto, who also works in progressive politics. She's also doing very important things in our upstairs bedroom, which is also our office. We have a really awesome lineup today. I'm really excited to be talking about youth vote with two of my favorite people who, it's been really sad that I haven't gotten to run into them at concerts or walking around the neighborhood, since Sarah and I actually live relatively close to one another. But I'd love to introduce the two of them to you. First, we have Sarah Audelo, who's the Executive Director of the Alliance for Youth Action. She's amazing and wonderful. She also has a dog with the same name as my dog, which is
really why we should be running into each other in the neighborhood.
It's true. We also have Ben Wessel, who's the Executive Director of NextGen America. Welcome to you both. I'd love to get started by each of you just giving a quick introduction to yourselves, why you do the work that you do, and anything else that you really want to say, to be honest. Go ahead. We'll start with Sarah.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. So excited to be here. And we'll try my very best to bring all the snarky realness that Ross and Ben and I would otherwise be partaking in at the too many conferences that would have otherwise happened during this time. But so yeah, I run the Alliance for Youth Action. We're a network of young people, political power building organizations from across the country. I'm sure a lot of you have run into them in your own communities. It's groups that are include Move Texas, New Era Colorado, Engage Miami, Ohio Student Association, Chicago Votes. Those are some of the folks in our network that we get to build with and support every day, and I'm so lucky to do this work. I started youth organizing. I am an elder millennial, as Gen Z likes to remind me. And so I started organizing, really protesting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and but found my organizing home and identity as part of organizing around sexual health and rights at a group called Advocates for Youth. And it changed my everything. I'm originally from Bakersfield, California, had no idea that organizing could even be a job. And it was heartbreaking that I had to leave my hometown in order to, one, learn this was work you could do, and then also to do this work. And so at the Alliance, we invest in young people locally to do electoral engagement work, issue engagement work, 365 days a year in their own communities, because no one should ever have to leave their hometown in order to build power and make change. So that's why I'm here. And yeah, so excited to engage with these two guys as well as all y'all.
Sweet, I'll go next. First and foremost, always exciting to be a part of the Run for Something family. So thanks to Ross and Ben and the whole gang for having me. My name is Ben Wessel. I'm the executive director at NextGen America. NextGen America is the Youth Vote Super PAC. We spend rich people's money on helping turn out progressive young people in order to help elect progressive candidates. We're doing work this cycle in 11 key battleground states. And if you were gonna guess 11 states, you'd probably guess the 11 states that we're in. Our work is everything from field organizing, which is all online now, to digital ads, to mail, to polling, to all sorts of crazy stuff. And because I'm an organizer at heart, I've got my text pledge to 25998 prepared for anyone who wants to pledge to vote with NextGen and get involved, because I know we got a lot of young folks on this call. I'll say I got started in this work in DC, which is where I grew up. My dad was a reporter, and the only reason we had cable in my house was so we could have C-SPAN. And I grew up just being really nerdy about what was going on in Congress. I had a fantasy Congress team before I had a fantasy football team. That's just who I am. And it wasn't until I was in high school, of course, as early, I think, for some folks, but for my neighborhood, it was late to get involved, where I heard from the late, great John Lewis, who presented to my high school and told a bunch of 16 and 17-year-olds that he was actually our age when he started getting involved, and that we had no excuse to wait if there was anything that we saw that was messed up in our community. And so with his charge, I got involved in the climate movement and the anti-war movement. I've been doing presidential to local campaigns ever since, both working in and out of Democratic Party stuff, as well as now on the independent side with NextGen. And that's who I am. And who did I draft first in my fantasy Congress team? Sheila Jackson Lee is the queen of the co-sponsor and the amendments. So shout out Texas.
Shout out to specifically Houston, my hometown. Always appreciate it. She was never my congressperson, but she's lovely. All right, a couple quick housekeeping things. Please ask questions. I have questions, and they're great. Ben from our team wrote them, and he's really awesome, but you're gonna ask really awesome questions too. So you can do that by dropping questions into the Q&A feature if you're watching this via Zoom. If you're watching this on Facebook Live, first, thank you to our partner Now This, who has been streaming these. Just drop a question in the comment section and we'll be able to ask those. So again, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom, just like this way. And just drop your question in and I'll take them as we come. But the first thing I want to start with, I'd love to hear what, there's a lot of candidates on the call. So what are some of the biggest barriers that you see candidates facing in bringing more young people into their campaigns and into the process more generally? We'll start with whichever one of you wants to go first. Go with Sarah.
I went first last time, Ben. You can go first this time.
Great, I'll go first. Super good question, right? We at NextGen, we tend to focus a lot on federal elections, but we know that one of the best ways to get young people involved is to start locally and figure out what are the things that are impacting their daily lives, whether it's lack of transportation in order to get to work, or it's the quality of the schools that they're potentially going to send their kids to. We know a lot of those local issues are often the ways that young people first engage in politics. But because we've grown up, many of us who are either, millennials or Gen Z, in a system where it seems like politics is broken and there's nothing you can do about it, it's really hard to get people motivated to say, I'm going to step up and make a change in my local community. So one of the things that I often recommend that candidates do when they are trying to find a way to mobilize some volunteers or talk to young people specifically about why voting locally matters is to share like a concrete example about some policy that got changed because of local involvement, right? And so sometimes that can look like, we know so many candidates are activists in their own right who can say, I went to a city council meeting and I pushed to defund the police and nothing happened. And so now I'm running to change that. Giving that one local example, that story of something that you can actually do, of a proof point, maybe this would be even better. I went to a city council meeting. I said we need to defund the police. They actually did it. And now I want to run to make sure we reform the existing police force. Showing that proof point is the sort of thing that really will motivate a population that's not so much, I would say, apathetic, which is what people tend to think, but instead is ambivalent about whether politics is actually a good avenue to make change.
Yeah, and just to build on what Ben's saying, a lot of what we do on the Alliance is focusing down ballot. Federal elections are great. We're going real hard this year. We go really hard on even year, but we're going to be right back out there in 2019 or 2020. Oh my God, that's backwards. 2021, when, what is time? When a lot of and frankly, more important work is happening. The more local you are, the more people feel the actual change that is being made in our communities. And so, couple of things to keep in mind. One is that when we talk about young voters, we're frequently having to deal with the bullshit that young people don't vote and young people don't engage. But the reality is that young voters are frequently new voters. And so we have to welcome young people into our democracy, both with, hey, this is how you register to vote. In years like this is how you vote and navigate through our very broken democracy that it seems so often like it just doesn't want our folks to vote. But then also about making the case of why. When we're asking young people, hey, have you heard from candidates who are running? They're frequently saying no. Candidates aren't reaching out to them. And young people don't want to get a ballot and just straight up vote for people with letters next to their names because political parties have not been great to young people. And so this is why it's so important for candidates to get in front of young people and say, yes, you care about defunding the police, me too. This is why I'm running for school board, because I'm going to make sure that there's no police departments in our public schools. That's why if you're running for city council, or any seat up and down the ballot, you should not be taking money from police unions. This is something that our folks in Arizona, Poder in Action, have been doing for a long time, is holding candidates' feet to the fire to say, what you're doing when you're running is going to have a reflection of how you govern. And everything from not taking money from police unions to being real clear about where you stand on the issues that young people care about and making it tangible, whether it is a pothole that no one is fixing in the road, whether it's the presence of police in schools, whether it's the cost of higher education. I worked in higher education for a long time, and it was mind-boggling how many state electeds didn't want to take on higher education and just make it free. That is something that state legislatures have control over much more than the federal government. And so it's all about making the issues tangible and real and changing people's lives, because those are the levels of government that y'all are engaging in. You're able to change people's lives significantly more so than most of the folks that are running for federal office.
I love it. I love it a lot. We actually just got a question in from Steph, and Steph, I can't pronounce I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name. I'm sorry. But the question was, we're not out there canvassing right now. And so what are some effective digital tactics that y'all found to replace traditional canvassing?
I mean, it's canvassing online. right? Is that you could still, a lot of this work does translate online. The conversations that we're having in person, we're also having over text, we're having over calls, the community building that we're having is saying, hey, bring your friends into this. It, of course, doesn't feel as great doing it sitting in our own homes nonstop, but we have to move a lot of this online. This is part of why we try to build political homes for young people. And that's, you know, as I think I'm seeing on here, we have folks who are both running for office, but then also folks who work at a lot of progressive organizations. That is why the year-round work is so important. It's because everyone's freaking out about voter registration now. We should freak out about voter registration, but it's really great that a lot of us have been doing voter registration nonstop for the last 3 years. Just to say, and I know this is harder with candidate campaigns, popping in and popping out, of course, makes your work much harder. But moving we have people who are answering our texts more, answering our calls more, showing up in curated spaces, which is, yes, about elections and campaigns, but also community building and having fun, have all been really helpful to keeping people engaged with our crews.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. You know, the NextGen team likes to think that we can reach young people online and on their phones even better now than we could before, because folks are trapped in their house. Some people have lost their jobs, and they're spending a lot more time sort of doing this. And so some of the creative tactics that we've been able to employ are really focused around canvassing online neighborhoods. So sure, we're interested in calling and texting as many folks, but I saw the questioner was saying, what if you don't have a voter roll? For us, we're going to Instagram posts where people are tagging a specific town or city or location and getting involved in the comments and engaging and saying, hey, we saw that you're at this gay bar here in Madison, Wisconsin. We're organizing around LGBTQ issues. Follow this link. Do you want to get involved? We are recruiting micro influencers. Again, you can do this all for free. It's all on social media. You find those people who are maybe posting the most on a subreddit about the town or city in which you live, or a Facebook group. You know, my favorite example is the Uber Drivers of Milwaukee Facebook group. Is a great place to find 5,000, 6,000 mostly young people who we know live in a certain area, and you can start engaging and say, hey, wouldn't it be great if the gig economy worked better for us? Hey, wouldn't it be great recruiting that top drag queen in Orlando to share out on her TikTok, you know, what you can do to get registered to vote. We've been doing a lot of that work, organizing online neighborhoods through micro influencers. And I'll just shout out that yesterday, I'm like obsessed with this. Yesterday, NextGen, we created a holiday. It was National Vote by Mail Day. I saw our questioners from Canada, so we'll call it International Vote by Mail Day, but I don't know what the laws are there, so don't get me in trouble with my lawyers. Where we reached out to 3.7 million young people across our 11 states in one day. The vast majority of that was on text message, but we do know that all of our follow-up will be multimodal. And so you can't think, just like you wouldn't only knock on someone's door, you also want to reach out to someone via text and via call and post on their wall and all those other things. So there's no one silver bullet. You have to try and reach someone in every way possible.
Sarah, do you have something to add? Okay, cool.
No.
All right. We got a couple questions coming in, but before we get to that, I know that both of your orgs do a lot of research on feelings and attitudes, like around young people. And I know that both of you have been doing research recently on it. So I'd love to give both of y'all the opportunity to talk about, you know, some of the most recent things that you're seeing, attitudes, feelings, et cetera, the young people have going into the 2020 election. We'll start with you, Sarah.
Yeah, so I'll drop in the chat the link to our site, but we're doing monthly tracking polls with what we're calling young persuadable Biden voters in 10 battleground states. We did in June. Our results will be live tomorrow for our July results, and we're going all the way through the election. Some highlights I think that are important is that generally young people are hyped to engage. There's a lot of enthusiasm. They know what's on the line, despite what headlines continue to say about young people and apathy. They're just wrong. And instead, young people are really eager to engage, they're eager to participate. But the flip side of that is they're not necessarily hearing enough from the candidates. We're seeing, again, this is like more focused on the presidential election, but in other research that we've seen, young people just do not hear from candidate campaigns. Usually half of the voters that progressives should be targeting are not getting contacted at all by candidate campaigns. And so for this polling in particular, we've seen the Trump campaign is really going hard online with Gen Z and reaching more of Gen Z than the Biden campaign is right now. We've also seen that on the issues, in terms of the issues young people care about, systemic racism and discrimination is the #1 issue that continues to be raised. And of course, that intersects onto many issues, whether it's criminal justice and policing, but also healthcare and the economy. And I think the other thing I'll raise when it comes to how people are thinking about voting, we have a lot of young people, and specifically Black youth, who are still committed to voting in person. And that is because we have to do education work to make sure people understand how to vote by mail. It's not easy. Every state has its own rules. We can't have a national narrative of, hey, like election day, everybody show up, because we don't want everyone to show up on election day. That would be pretty awful. But what that means is, and why it's so important to focus on local organizations and local messaging, is we need local groups to help people navigate how the heck to figure out how they're going to vote, whether it's by mail or absentee ballot, or if it's in person. And we just have a lot of work to do there to help close those knowledge gaps, because young voters generally are not vote by mail and absentee voters. It's newer to folks. Even in states where we have vote by mail like Colorado, a lot of young people still love to vote in person. And so there's just a lot of work ahead of us, both in terms of making sure candidates are championing the issues that young people care about, even as they're rolling out plans generally for the population. What does it mean for younger folks specifically? And that is, I think, a continuous ask that we have. I guess the only other thing I'd add in is we asked specifically about COVID and how COVID is impacting young people's lives. And the #1 issue that they continue to raise is their parents' health. They're worried about their parents' health, followed by their health, and then questions of economic security, because COVID has meant a lot of young people have lost their jobs. I know my crews are trying to hire them. I know Ben's crews are trying to hire them. But this is a problem that, frankly, the federal government needs to pay a lot more attention to.
Yeah, I'll chime in with a couple other things. And we are also releasing some more polling tomorrow, and I just dropped the link in the chat. One of the best things about working closely with Sarah is that she and her team can ask one set of questions, so we'll ask something completely different, and we will increase the amount of knowledge that's out there about young voters. And I will just take a time out from answering the question to say, holy crap, for the fact that the Alliance for Youth Action, NextGen America, Run for Something even exists and are as big and powerful in reaching millions of young people, whether they're running for office, whether they're trying to donate, whether they're trying to go out there and campaign. This is a sea change from even just 5 years ago, when the youth civic engagement and young voter landscape was dire. And so I think we can pat ourselves on the back for kicking some serious tail and starting to help young people engage in politics more. So just wanted to say that before I forgot. What does our polling say? Well, that young people are fired up and more motivated to vote in this election than they have in any other. And so for all the down ballot candidates who we know are on this call, I would encourage you to reach out to as many young people as you can, and don't write them off, no matter whether they have a turnout score of 0 or a turnout score of 100, or you've never heard of a turnout score at all, but you want to skip young people. We are just seeing that every young person is up for grabs in this election. Everyone is more motivated to vote than they have in any other election before. And that includes 78% of people who were eligible to vote in 2016 and decided to sit it out. One of the things we know about these young people, whether they're Democrats, independents, or Republicans, they actually agree with Democrats and often with progressives on the issues. So we are seeing, honestly, the young Republicans in our polling, which is much more about the presidential, even though they're young Republicans, and some of whom are saying that they're going to vote for Donald Trump, they say they trust Joe Biden on climate change more than they trust Donald Trump. Young Republicans say they trust Joe Biden will look out for communities of color better than Donald Trump will. We're seeing sea change in our politics, where it's no longer D versus R amongst the youngest people. It's honestly young people versus the racists. And I think that's going to make a really huge difference to anyone who's running in an election this year, to know that your base of support, if you're out there talking about things like defunding the police or trying to ensure that Black Lives Matter protesters aren't being roughed up by a fascist invasion army like is happening in Portland right now, we know that there's a ton of work that can be done to bring young people into the political process because of this moment. A big thing that we asked about in our polling is about the protests that are happening right now and whether young people approve of them and think that they're smart ways of making change. And young people overwhelmingly are in support of the protests, something that we're seeing cross-racially, and also doesn't even matter if you live in a city or a rural area, it's like something that you support. And this idea that protesting is a part of the solution, I think is really, really important for us to remember as electoral folks. So we can say it's important that you protest, it's also important that you register and that you cast a ballot. Each of these are powerful tools in your toolbox for change, and we'd be foolish if we didn't use all of them in order to make a real difference. The last thing that I'll say about our polling that I think is really exciting is that you know, you can tell from my shirt from Justice Democrats, I could be pretty lefty. And we asked a bunch of young people about the fact that there was this policy task force between Bernie and Biden to push forward a progressive policy agenda that the Biden administration agreed to end cash, or the Biden campaign to push states to end cash bail, to speed up the transition to 100% clean electricity. These sorts of things are incredibly motivating for our young people, especially those who often sit on the sidelines, people who weren't planning on voting or voted third party or voted for Bernie in the primary and were like, I don't know about Joe Biden. These are the sorts of things that we can say, hey, like, we don't have to hide that we are progressives. Young people overwhelmingly, regardless of party ID, identify with these issue stances. And when you can contrast yourself against your opponent, hey, I am looking to build a more progressive future in XYZ way. My opponent is continuing a Trump thing, is continuing the status quo, is not listening to young people. That's a really motivating way to help persuade folks support your campaign.
That's really interesting research, and I think we'll probably get into some more maybe some more specific questions like as we go through here. But thanks both of you. And just as a heads up for folks, after this call, you'll get all of the links that are being dropped in the chat. So you'll be able to sign up to see the research from both NextGen and Alliance for Youth Action. We have a question from Caroline. You know, it's specifically about voter registration this cycle. Clearly, we can't do it in person. Yeah. What are some ways that y'all are doing to, you know, not do it in person? And what are some ways that like candidates can, you know, like we have a number of candidates on here who I'm sure are also going to do voter registration on their own as well. So what are some things that folks can do? Sarah?
Cry. I mean, it's just awful. I'm sorry. Like the voter registration problem that is in front of us right now, there are just very few good answers here. And I just want to be so real and honest about that because there's a lot of misinformation out there about voter registration. For a lot of our new young voters, even if they're in online voter registration stage, you still have to print, sign, and mail a form in order to actually be registered to vote. And that's why even in states that have online voter registration, groups like the ones in our network, groups like Ben's Cruz, still do field voter registration because it's more effective than hoping someone will print, sign, and mail something. But that is where we are. So I know some folks in our network are working on mail voter registration, which is like a good solution for now, although the turnaround times are a bit and as like a while. And as we get closer to National Voter Registration Day in particular, some of the things that we're thinking about is which we totally love as a founder of the day, it's awesome. And will be a little bittersweet this year. But is also, we need to help young people figure out where they can print their forms. Libraries are closed, which makes this hard. But, you know, for the schools that for some reason are going to be open when they should not be, directing people towards libraries in order to print their voter registration forms and get those in is going to be really important. And then I'd say for those of you who are already elected officials, or who will hopefully be elected officials soon, you have to pass democracy reform as soon as possible when you get in office. We shouldn't have to be in this place. Every state should have same-day registration. Every state should have end-to-end online voter registration. Every state should have automatic voter registration. And frankly, we should get to a place where voter registration doesn't even exist because it was literally created to make sure that people could not vote. So it's like basically a heartbreaking story right now, but this is also why groups like ours do voter registration every single day of the year, every year, and not just in election cycles like this, because the good news is a ton of young people have registered to vote since 2016, and we have to engage them. So that's my little spiel.
I'd piggyback on that. I think one of the things for all the candidates here who are running in municipal races or county races or state legislative races, this is, I think if you told me I would say this a year ago, I would be shocked. But voter registration may not be your best path forward when you're building out your pathway to victory. I will say from the national and federal landscape, if you live in a battleground state this year, that's, you know, happily a growing list of states that are presidential battlegrounds. I would say the money is going to come pouring in from the big national orgs and the big foundations and funders, and they'll send all that mail and they'll buy digital ads that will be focused on getting people to register to vote. And a lot of the new registration will come from that. If you're in a solid red state or you're in a solid blue state, my advice to you would be identify, think in your mind, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 different groups or gathering places where an unregistered population may be. So you can think of a high school that is in your district, or a community college, or a new citizenship workshop or something like that. And what I would do is I would organize the heck out of that. Instead of showing up with a clipboard, you can find the person who is, you know, the principal at that high school, and you can shoot them a note or make a phone call and say, hey, look, I know you have access to contact info for all of these young people. How can I work with you to help them register to vote, right? This is gonna be some like old school phone tree or text banking in order to get people those appropriate links and give them that reliable information. That may be the way that we have to go. But I do think, like Sarah has mentioned, so many young people have been registering since 2016, that registration is not the only way that we should think about actually getting their votes. It should be about engaging them on the issues and making sure that they're voting for you safely.
Well, that was ended on a slightly hopeful note. I appreciate that. And also, like, the candor.
Ben will always end on a hopeful note. So
this is the Ben and Sarah Road show.
Ben will always bring it back to the hope.
It's when you drink so many bubbles every day, you end up bubbly. This is how you know you're a part of a youth vote event, because it's not sponsored but enjoyed by LaCroix.
You know, we have a question here, you know, about like engaging, and Sarah, you know, I would love for you to take the lead on answering this, because you talked about down ballot races a little bit earlier. But, you know, for folks and for young people who don't live in a presidential battleground state, although who knows, maybe all states will be presidential battleground states by the end of this year, one can only hope. How do you work with folks to make sure that they're motivated to vote, especially for these down ballot elections that like really do impact people's lives?
Yeah, we got to talk about what the heck these down ballot races, like these candidates, these electives actually work on, and how they're connected to young people's day-to-day lives. One of the tactics that we engage in on the Alliance is we have voter guides that we put out, because so much, again, young people are not just going to vote for someone because you say, hey, vote for me. They want to know where you stand on the issues. They want to know how candidates are contrasted with one another. And so that's part of why we put out this voter guide program, to show, hey, X candidate, do you believe in making sure that Milwaukee Police Department should not be in Milwaukee Public Schools? Do you believe that climate change is real? Such a low bar at this point, truly. But nonetheless, that is one way to show contrast between candidates in some races. But that type of, and then also we host, in the before times, candidate forums where we really literally try to get candidates in front of young people, engaging on the issues in a way that makes sense for young people. A lot of times it might be straight up questions on issues, but it's also about getting to know candidates as human beings and people. Because there's so many myths out there about what does it mean to be an elected official or a politician. And a lot of times, as Ross has mentioned on here, y'all are organizers too. And it's really powerful to hear that, hey, I'm one of you too, and I'm running for office, and here's my story, and here's the change I'm trying to make. And here's how I want your help, not just on election day, but after. I think one of the stories that I think about a ton with one of our groups in Texas, now called Move Texas, they used to be Move San Antonio, but now Move Texas, is they run epic voter registration programs. They've expanded across the state. They're throwing down in city council races and state house races, just all the way up and down the ballot, and their alumni end up working for a lot of those city council members. That it's truly, when we're investing in young people, both they run for office, like y'all, they end up becoming public servants, and they're really the backbone to our progressive infrastructure to make sure that it's not about just electoral work and bouncing, but doing the work for the long run. And so just, yeah, we gotta make sure that there's enough information, frankly, about y'all out there, making sure your websites make sense, that it's clear where you stand. Candidates are really bad at taking a whole paragraph to answer a very simple question that could really be yes or no. And so context is helpful, but also sometimes we just need to know where people stand. And that's part of why we run a voter guide program that only has yes, no questions, because if we open it up, frequently candidate responses, they just confuse people. It's really hard to figure out where the heck people stand.
And Ben, for 2020, what are things that, folks should be thinking about, especially, because, I don't think it's a secret that not all young people are super stoked about Joe Biden. So what are some things that down ballot candidates and just folks generally should be thinking about as we engage with young voters around 2020, and specifically around the presidential and everything that goes, down below it?
Totally. It's fascinating that, coming out of the primary, obviously Joe Biden did not have a lot of support from young people. He was won the nomination off the backs of older voters, but he's really been putting in some effort. This is where I spin room Ben. He's really been putting in some effort to help engage with young people. And part of the ways that we have found as an outside organization that's trying to get young people involved, and knowing that oftentimes when young people think about voting, they really only think about the presidential. So the ways that we want to start the conversation before we can do all the work that Sarah just mentioned about down ballot is by ensuring folks that young people recognize that Joe Biden is actually listening to them. Right? He's an empathetic guy. That comes across in any interview he does or in any TV ad. And what that means is that he's willing to say, hey, I am from a different generation and I don't know what it's like to be you, but I'm willing to listen and I will change my policies based on what you say. So we have seen him time and time again say, young people talk to me about the issue of how are they going to afford rent during COVID? And it forced him to say, wow, I didn't really think about this. I'm a homeowner, but I'm going to call for rent forgiveness for all young people, or all renters, over half of whom are young people in this country, during this COVID economic crisis. So we could show those examples of him listening to young people and then changing his policies accordingly. And that is very motivating for young people, for them to feel like they have some power over the system. The second thing I'd say, and this I would really recommend for any of you who are running for office, is that Joe Biden's not going to be able to actually enact all these policies alone, right? And in fact, and sometimes it's not even up to the federal government. And so what we like to talk about is, I think of it as the team of Avengers. It's very Marvel comic books. The team of Avengers that Joe Biden will help empower to make change on behalf of young people, right? Whether it's Bernie and AOC or activists and experts, listening to people who listen to science and facts rather than to greed and corporate money, you should paint yourself as one of those avengers, right? Joe Biden is going to be in there in Washington, and he's going to be calling for transition to clean energy. Here in our community, as mayor, I'm going to put in place, a new power purchasing agreement with our utility. We together, local and federal, are going to make a difference on these issues that young people care most about, and I'm a part of that team, right? You can. It's one of those things where people don't often recognize that young people, like Sarah mentioned, don't really care whether you're a D or an R. They think both parties are BS. But if you can tie yourself to the issues that really matter most, and you can say, hey, this candidate who is really focused on issue X or Y, I agree with them on that. It's a really strong way to increase your sort of favorability and your name ID. I will just once again put in a plug for nextgenamerica.org/research, where you can read like pages and pages and pages and pages of PDFs about what we think are some of the most compelling messages to turn young people out for Joe Biden.
Awesome. We got a really interesting question in from Alice. She wants to hear from y'all she's, in a district in Montana. And there's, like a progressive younger population in the district, a conservative older population. So like ways to like think about balancing those two messages to those two different groups of people, since you're going to need both of them to win their election. So Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll start off by saying I will talk about this in a general context, but Alice, you should reach out to an amazing organization in our network called Forward Montana. They are incredible. They organize young people statewide. When Senator Tester does his victory lap, he frequently does his victory lap because of Native American voters and young voters. And Forward Montana is the organization turning out those young voters, and they're going very hard in the Senate race and also the gubernatorial race and some very local races as well that are more connected to climate and public lands there. So anyways, check out Forward Montana. Can't say enough about them. They're one of the best organizations in the whole damn country organizing the youth vote year round. But I think when it comes to kind of pairing the progressive ideas of young voters, and I should say, like in some research that we did last year, which just is a thread line to all we're talking about right now, when we ask young people what they're looking for, they say they want big, bold change, but they've seen generations of small change that is both forward, or big change that is taking us backwards. And they want big change to move us forward because they're impatient with what has been in front of us. When Vice President Biden initially was rolling out his campaign, he was talking a lot about a return to normalcy, which a lot of us pushed back against, because what is the normal that we're actually looking for? Young people, and this is millennials' second recession. We don't want go back to the first recession, as we're in the middle of the second one. So what does normalcy actually even mean? It's about looking forward. And I think that's one of the things that it's an opportunity for younger and older voters to talk together about. That young people, when we're talking about this big, bold change, what we're frequently talking about is making sure people are just treated with dignity and humanity, and that we're not trying to be like sideline one of the identities that we hold, so that we can take incremental steps. That when young people are showing up into a room, I am showing up as a woman, I am showing up as a Latina, I am showing up as someone who is from a really ignored part of California, that progressives tend to hate on all the time. And I'm bringing all of that with me into this room, which means that if you're talking about power in California, I'm going to be like, so what are you doing to invest in progressives in Bakersfield? When you talk about reproductive autonomy, I'm going to say, well, I want to make sure that undocumented women are not being thrown under the bus in that. And that is really what we're talking about, and the bold vision that young people have is making sure people in their full self are able to show up and be treated with dignity and humanity. And that, to me, is the difference between some of the more conservative approaches. Is we're only going to allow some, or even in the big D Democratic spaces, right? We're only going to allow some of you to show up. We're only going to care about some of you. Whereas young people are like, no, we're not going to throw our folks under the bus here, and you need to think about all of us.
Yeah, and I would just piggyback on that and say one of the things that always amazes me most when I watch local candidates flounder in trying to talk to young voters is that they immediately forget that they are a normal human person and they just think of themselves as the issue section of their website, right? And so one of the things that I think has been most empowering when I've been in the field with local electeds or with folks who are running for office locally, you can just talk about what it's like to be you, regardless of all of the issues. And that commonality, that building some rapport with a young voter is going to go a long, long way. And so you may have to take issue stance X or issue stance Y, either because you really believe it in your heart, or because you have to do that in order to get a more conservative or older population. With young people who do care primarily about the issues, but don't necessarily think a lot about voting down ballot, I would just start by being their friend and like being approachable and being interested and being talking about what it's like to be a young person in America today. And that common rapport will build so much more of a base to build issue-based support on than anything else, right? I'm constantly reminded of a work I did with a candidate for governor in Vermont 10 years ago, a guy named Matt Dunn, who is running as a young father who, I mean, he came in fourth in a 5-way primary, so probably not a good example. But Matt combined every political stop with a community service outing, right? So every time he gave a speech, they were also doing a park cleanup. Every time he was doing a meet and greet, he was also volunteering in a homeless shelter. And just that principle of like, this is who I am and service politics is what I believe in, got way more young people fired up about him than like, you know, low income heating assistance programs, which is like a top issue in Vermont. And also because I see the name in the chat, Alice, you should ask, I believe he's your husband and or fiance who has been elected several times in your town, how he did it. And tell him Ben says hi.
Yeah, and actually, Ben, as you're talking, you reminded me of something that just, again, taking back to my like, higher education organizing days, like a lot of what older voters had growing up, young people no longer have. That the gaps in income equality were not as bad as they were. It's like the wealth gaps have just increased so dramatically that I remember seeing members of Congress speak on the floor of the House about how their summer jobs their summer minimum wage jobs would pay for college tuition. Like that doesn't exist anymore and has not for a very long time. Like, could you even imagine that your summer job would cover the full cost of you attending college? And so that is the other thing I think about is like, what were the things that older generations were offered, were given, that have been taken away from the next generation, where older generations were truly invested in. Specifically, if we're looking at like the boomers, for example, and how they were heavily invested in post-war, to what we're doing with young people now and how we're kind of just tossing them out there and saying, good luck. And that to me, I think is another place where folks can really come together is when we're honest about the structures that no longer exist to support young people as they enter adulthood and as they attempt to support their families with minimum wages that haven't increased and absolutely not a living wage, with the fact that you know, so many of our economic models are based off of 2 working parents. And what does that mean if there's a parent who's unable to work? So it just, we gotta be more real about the hand that we're holding, like they're dealing with young people, especially compared to older generations.
Yeah, I really wish that I could I have a newspaper route that like paid off my $70,000 in student loan debt that I have. It'd be super great. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about vote by mail. At least in the campaigns that I've worked, I want to be careful about my generalizations. So at least in the campaigns that I have worked in the past, which have been many, young people aren't represented in large numbers in vote by mail. So I'd love to hear some of the strategies and tactics that y'all are using this year to get folks to sign up to vote by mail, and things that, I imagine some of the things that y'all are doing might not, work for like a local candidate. So also like, things that you think might also work at a smaller scale. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, totally. I'm obsessed with vote by mail, not only because we should all utilize it if we can safely and legally in our community in order to prevent the spread of COVID, but also because vote by mail has traditionally been a great equalizer, right? And in states that switch to 100% vote by mail, we see increased jumps in turnout from young people, in particular young people of color. And that's true whether you're in a blue state like Oregon or a red state like Utah. This vote by mail and increasing the accessibility of being able to cast a mail-in ballot is actually good for getting more young people out to vote. The problem is that nobody's used to it. Why? Because like, who freaking mails anything anymore? You know, we have asked all sorts of poll questions from young people about, do you have access to a printer to print out an application? Do you currently have stamps or know how to buy them? People are like, I have no idea how to buy a stamp. And then when you push them, you say, well, how would you buy anything? You'd say, I go on Amazon. And it's like, great, just do that. I know I'm not supposed to be, I don't know whether that's a good solution or not. I have stamps already. Bottom line though is there's an education gap, right? And young people, one of my teammates already says, young people are too intimidated to ask for ranch dressing at a pizza place. So of course they're way too intimidated to figure out how to vote in something as complicated as a mail-in election. And I just think that is so true. So what we need to do is bolster young people with information. And that means talking to them early and often about their plan to vote. We all go through, when we read Amanda's great book about how to be a candidate or a campaign manager, it talks about making plans to vote as a really effective GOTV tactic. We need to start that now, 100 days out from the election, because it is so critical that people start jumping through those mental gymnastics. We see the Postal Service saying it might take 2, 3, 4 weeks for you to get your ballot. That means in every contact you're having with a voter right now, whether they're young or old, you should be saying, are you requesting a mail-in ballot? Here's the link, I'll text it to you. Let me tell you how to do it. Here's what happens. The earlier we get this done, the more likelihood there is of not screwing this up so people don't have to show up late and vote in person. Some of the things that NextGen is doing, sure, we are giving people links to commit to vote by mail. We're sending people to their state government. We are mailing people absentee ballot request forms. And we're telling people, you don't have to know where you're gonna be in November, but you have to pledge that you're gonna vote. We have so many students who are itinerant. We have so many people who are housing insecure and may not be able to afford rent where they are now in a couple months if this economic recession continues. But what you have to say to yourself is, I commit to cast a ballot by mail, and I will, by X date, figure out how to get it done. And as a candidate, this is so different than anything else that you're usually talking to folks about. It's not about the virtues of progressive policy or not. It's about filling out a government form. And so you need to be straight and direct and just to the point with folks. We can't get all caught up in it's a conspiracy or are they gonna throw my ballot in the trash? Like, that stuff only serves to dissuade people from casting a ballot. So we wanna be quick to the point, make sure it's very factual, and direct people to those information sources that they already trust.
Yeah, and just to everything that Ben said about vote by mail, and also to just remind folks that sometimes systems fail. And that's why it's so important for us to fight for in-person polling. That's why it's so important to fight for early vote expansion in our communities. And that if folks are unable to go through the hoops of voting by mail, that they're showing up to vote in person early, which is something I know that a lot of y'all push to make sure your voters are turning out early anyways. But that is, I think, one of the other really important pieces here is sometimes you just don't get your ballot. DC has great election laws. I didn't get my ballot for the primary, and so I voted in person, and I do this work all the time. And so that's just the reminder again that we're gonna have a lot of people who are already planning to vote in person, no matter how much we're pushing them to vote by mail. That's why we have to keep our polling places open. That's why we have to expand early vote. That's why we have to keep our polling locations accessible to where people live. And then, you know, when we get there, it's about PPE, it's about keeping people in line. As it's you know, this, I think election day is just, we just don't know what it's going to throw our way.
And I would just add one last thing, and I learned this when I was actually canvassing with an Alliance for Youth Action organization, New Era Colorado, which is people who aren't used to getting a mail-in ballot might not know that they actually got their ballot. So one of the things I would recommend that you do is call your county office or call whoever the election administration is in your state and say, what envelope, what color is the envelope? When do you expect it to get there? So then when you're phone banking or you're canvassing, say, did you get your ballot in the mail? It should be white with a red stripe on it. People will have a visual referent that you can be referring to. They're like, yeah, I don't know, I throw away all my mail. Or like, I don't know, I've got a big pack of things sitting on the radiator right next to my door. Being as specific as possible as we would normally be about, okay, do you know where your polling place is? When are you planning on going? Who are you gonna bring? You wanna do the same thing. Great, it came in a blue envelope. Do you have it? I can wait on the phone. Oh, you do, great. Do you have time to fill it out right now? I'm happy to talk you through the candidates on your ballot and stay on the phone with you. You can be doing that work in real time. And it's really rewarding because people will be, like I mentioned, I was in Boulder, Colorado, and I had a bunch of frat boys be like, yeah, I don't know what to do. Come in, have a beer, and we'll talk about it. And I was like, this is the best voter education experience I've ever had, with a bunch of like bros drinking beer on a Saturday morning. So it's really critical to remember to do that.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add here is like, if you're a candidate, like, or you're your campaign staffer, make sure you know the rules in your area for voting by mail inside and out. If you aren't sure, like, call the election administrators and ask them the questions. Like, sometimes call them a second time if you're not totally sure you got the right answer the first time, because, you know, and I don't want to offend our lawyer friends on the call, but as I've learned dealing with political lawyers over the years, sometimes the first time you ask the question isn't the final answer that you get from them if you keep asking the same question over and over again. So I think it's human nature. So make sure that, like, you know that process super, super well. And if you do know the process really well, make sure that other campaigns in the area are also getting that information as well. And then the last thing I'd say is, like, if you're a candidate, your voice also matters. And so, you know, like, make sure, as Sarah has been talking about, like, you're pushing, you know, like, there's still states and there's still places where, like, you can probably push your government to do more around vote by mail, especially for, like, local officials who are potentially, like, influenced by mass movement, which, as we've seen recently, can be quite effective. So I'd add those two things. I'll end on, I always like to ask these questions separately, but I'll ask them together. The first question is, what is the dumbest advice you ever heard given to a candidate? And the second is, you don't have to say who it was or who the candidate was even, but if you want to, it'd be more interesting. And then the last one is, like, what's giving you hope right now?
Can we do the first question and then the second one, so we all end on a positive? So the first one, it was actually something I was going to say related to what you just said right now about knowing local laws, just because, again, there's national organizations screw up election messaging all the time, like all the time. And that's why it's so important. Like, don't rely on the national org, talk to your local folks, because a lot of people with very good intentions end up, like, sending the wrong information out, and that's really crappy. So in that vein, I've seen advice must have been given somewhere, but local electeds in states where there's no online voter registration saying, today is the last day to register to vote. Click on this link to register to vote, as if that will actually make people able to vote registered, when that is not the case. And so again, to get to, like, the laws piece is, if your state does not have online voter registration, you should probably not say, click on this link because today is the last day to register to vote, because you actually need people to hop through a lot more steps for that to be able to happen.
I'm taking a very different approach to this. I worked for Cory Booker's first campaign for US Senate. And one of our big events that we would do in every county that he would go to, we would do a run with Cory, which was literally a 2.5-mile run that Cory would go on with any volunteers or supporters who wanted to come. And it was a great chance to interact with the candidate. And the advice that he got was this was not a good use of his time, and that his time was the most valuable thing he had as a candidate, and he shouldn't be doing something that won't lead to any votes. When in fact, a run with a future US Senator is like one of the best ways that I can imagine, first of all, to actually get exercise as a campaign staffer, but more importantly, to like get some humanizing face time with someone who is often going to be viewed as like a suit who does some job that you never really engage with. So don't let anyone dehumanize you as a candidate. Like if you're really into fire juggling, like freaking fire juggle away. That is going to be so much more exciting than your perfect policy platform. And then I'll get on to what's one thing that's giving me hope right now. You may have heard about it, but yesterday we contacted 3.7 million young people in 11 battleground states with over 6,000 volunteers, sending more, 50% the number of texts that we sent in the entire 2016 election cycle on one day for National Vote by Mail Day, which was a day that NextGen created randomly, thanks to our data director, Matt Brooks. We got Barack Obama to tweet about it. We got Kristen Bell to tweet about it. We got Lance Bass to tweet about it, all the heavy hitters. And just the fact that we can still do this thing, even though we're all stuck inside, we can still organize the crap out of a ton of young people across the country. That's what gives me hope.
And what gives me hope, and I'm going to drop a link into the chat here, are the young organizers in our network. We had an amazing piece go up in the New York Times about young people organizing every single day to build power in their communities and make sure that our folks are treated with dignity and respect, and that they're safe and able to just thrive. And so being in relationship with the groups that we build with, that gives me hope. And so if you are new to the Alliance, you should follow us online. Our Daniela on our team does a really amazing job on all of our social media. We have every 2 weeks a roundup of all the really powerful work happening across the network on Instagram and our stories. Like that to me is just like to just see it, to feel all the powerful work that folks are doing is what gives me hope, because for all the crap that's out there, literally just redirect to young organizers and you're like, yeah, okay, we're gonna be okay.
Love it. All right, we're going to end on that hopeful note, just only 2 minutes late. Thank you so much, Sarah and Ben, for doing this. Really appreciate it. This is fun in a different way than getting to meet with you and hang out at conferences, but it is also awesome. For folks at home watching this, we're going to do more of these throughout the summer, every single Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Through the month of August, and we'll be doing more going into September. If you want to know more about who's coming up next, we're actually going to be announcing August's lineup on Monday of next week. So follow us on Twitter at runforsomething.net to find. And if you want to sign up, there's also a link in the chat to get email updates about future Armchair Series events. I'm probably also I would be a bad co-founder if I didn't also make a pitch and an ask at the end of this. This work is expensive, it's hard, and we need your support, so give whatever you can. runforsomething.net/build, and also to these amazing organizations, Alliance for Youth Action and NextGen. Y'all are the best. Love you both, and thanks everyone for hopping on.
Thanks, y'all. Give your money to Run for Something.
Bye.
Everyone.